SBC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
The Dutch government is in turmoil this week, and while everyone else in the media landscape is preoccupied with geopolitics and the ideological future of Europe's 8th largest economy, on the iGaming Daily podcast we're going to talk about what impact the coalition collapse could have on the country's still relatively young and maturing betting sector. We're also going to hear some insights live from the Netherlands from our SBC News colleague Viktor Kayed, who is attending the Gaming in Holland Summit in Amsterdam, of which we are an event partner. I'm Ted Orme-Claye, SBC News editor, and I'm here with Ted Memmier, SBC's editor-at-large, and we're going to do one of our favourite things, which is have a crack at political punditry now and then. So welcome to today's episode of iGaming Daily, sponsored by Optimove. Ted, our resident Jeremy Paxman, how's things going with you?
Thanks. And thanks for branding me the resident Paxo. I welcome that.
Thank you. I know we like to consider ourselves both politically minded individuals, don't we?
He's been retired for years, hasn't he? I mean,
yeah, he's packed it in. But his legacy lives on, Ted.
Right,
it lives on in us, mate. That's what it's going to do today.
Maybe you're telling me something,
yeah. Yeah, just dropping a hint, mate. So, as I said, and this was reported very well by our colleague Victor as well. Yesterday, he's written a very good article that we'll put a link to in the podcast description for people to find. There's been a big political development in the Netherlands, hasn't there? The government has collapsed after only around a year in power, I think. Obviously, it was a 4-party coalition. So, you know, Ted, have you been following this development quite closely? It's been all over the news. What exactly has happened, and what impact could it have on the local industry, as a bit of a general overview?
So, look, I think we're going to kind of rewind on Dutch politics, and it took this Conservative coalition that has formed of 4 parties pretty much from 2023. It took them a year to agree terms on their coalition agenda, and that has been kind of disbanded within 8 months of being in power. The main reason is Geert Wilders and the Party of Freedom, and they put forward a 10 policy principle on immigration and asylum seeking in the Netherlands, which was rejected by the other coalition parties. And Prime Minister Dick Schoof rejected the mandate as soon as it was proposed to him. It appears that, according to the Electoral Council of the Netherlands, the earliest election date will be the 29th of October. And again, it seems that the Dutch the Dutch electorate is going to another election, but again, the question forms on how will a new government be formed. And this seems to be kind of no outright leading party in Dutch politics as stands. So it's very open to how the next government will be formed and what makeup it takes.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the Dutch politics and the political system, it's very similar to a lot of other European nations in that it's very different to what we're used to in the UK, isn't it? Where there's a lot more, there's various different parties involved with often much more specific agendas.
Sure.
And, you know, and they often have a more proportional system of voting, don't they? And as a result of that, there's very rarely one single party that comes out on top. Whilst in the UK, you know, coalition governments are pretty rare here in the it seems in more recent memory. Obviously, we've had like the Conservative Lib Dem coalition and so on, but like if you look at historically in the UK, these are very rare. So this is something we're not particularly used to. And obviously, as a result of that, if you then want to ground it more in the industry, we've got like the Conservatives had no problem with rolling out their Gambling Act review. Obviously, it took a long while, and there were lots of, as we've discussed extensively on this podcast, there was lots of hold-ups to that, lots of changes in people in charge. But at the end of the day, they never really had a problem with selling that to the rest of Parliament because they controlled Parliament, and now you've got Labour in charge, and they've got the same scenario where they've got a majority of MPs. They've committed to seeing out the Gambling Act review, and now it's continuing. In countries like the Netherlands, where you've got these various different political parties, each with their own own agendas and mandate on this area, and now that then creates the sort of instability that we've seen here. It means that their own review of their gambling legislation, things like that, is just consistently at risk of being put on ice, isn't it? I know I've rambled a bit there, but would you say that's a reasonable
I agree. I agree with you. And the other thing here is, I think from a UK perspective, I think the narrative of what's happening in Dutch politics is, does resemble what's going on in the UK, as in there is kind of a growing populist element, and it is the same kind of agenda of, hey, migration's on the card, right? What do you do with asylum seekers? But also that kind of rural and urban divide between the politics. And you got a party in the Party of Freedom that is completely rejected anything to do with kind of net zero, which we're going to see interplay in UK politics. Now, going back to the gambling reform initiatives, there is kind of consensus with a bit of a twist between what type of lean does it carry. Does it go towards a right? Does it meander right, or does it meander left? Right. So what the parties are agreeing on is age restrictions, and they want to raise the minimum age of gambling for high risk games from 18 to 21. They want to implement a much tougher advertising ban, which we've already seen happen in the Dutch. I mean, the Dutch gaming already carries kind of a near circa blanket ban on all types of medium. It also enforces a very tough policy on targeting under, you've got to make sure that all campaigns are signed off and target above the age of 24. And the other area is this imposition of a monthly or universal deposit limits on accounts, divided between players aged under 24 and those above at 300 and 700 euros. And finally, giving kind of new powers to the KSA to combat illegal gambling and just be a much tougher enforcer. I think it's they want to apply a lot, but we just don't know kind of the end mold or the kind of the blueprint of how that will be applied in the coming year.
Yeah, like you say, if we kind of compare this to the UK, the Dutch government and Dutch legislators and so on moved a lot quicker, didn't they, in implementing a lot of these measures, certainly in comparison to the Gambling Act review. But obviously, a lot of this is a reaction to how quickly the market has evolved and grown over the past few years, isn't it? Because obviously, we reported on this back in 2021. In October that year, you had the Remote Gaming Act, the KOA Act come into force. It re-regulated the market, relaunched an online market under this new framework. And that initially had 10 license holders, didn't it? And in the 4 years since, that's grown to at least 30, I think, off the top of my head. There's been a lot of companies who wanted to set up in the Netherlands. As we talked about earlier, it's a very wealthy country. It's got a large economy. It's got a big demand for sports. Football, like in the rest of Europe, is hugely popular there. So therefore, it makes it a very good market for the betting industry. But as a result of that, and there's been a term that we've often seen used by Dutch politicians and gambling reform campaigners is bombardment or explosion of advertising in particular. I think Dutch advertising spend at some points was reaching like over $1 billion, I think, in the first half of 2024. And there were a lot of consumer groups who were saying that they felt like there was just a constant bombardment of advertising, particularly on the television, particularly around sports. And that's led to, as we've seen in other markets like the UK, a lot of concern about the social impact this could have, about the exposure of gambling to young people. And that's really driven a lot of the political discussions around betting, I think, hasn't it? Much like we've seen in other countries.
I agree. I think to a certain extent we're going to rewind back to when the market kicked off and how COA was applied. And straight from the off, there's a political backlash in how the market was structured, in how licenses were granted. And also there was a split between the kind of the private companies in Dutch gaming versus the liberalized market. And I think a lot of parties just viewed the COA and wanted to sink it immediately. I don't think that there was ever kind of any long-term vision to how this market will evolve and how it kind of would implement kind of better kind of protections. I think both if you look at kind of the Greens and the Greens and other kind of left-leaning parties, they were immediately against. They immediately wanted to apply a blanket ban on advertising. I think that this is coming towards kind of a natural conclusion for the car market. It will be disbanded by October, regardless of any kind of political intervention or election.
Really? So you think it's going to be that short-lived? Only 4 years?
I think that's just because it carries both the consensus of right-leaning parties and left-leaning parties. I think if you're in the industry now, the only kind of green shoot here is if you've already got a license, you're kind of reviewing that maybe come the end of the year, the coalition drops its tax rises or its scheduled tax rise to 38% by 2026.
Do you think then, Ted, I think I'm going a bit off script here, what we've been talking about, but we've seen a lot of companies try and get into the Netherlands via M&A, haven't we?
Yeah.
Do you think that if this market under the KOA Act is does collapse, like in much in the same way the government has, do you think a lot of companies might start bailing on the Netherlands? Do you reckon they might just see it as being more trouble than it's worth if it doesn't have sort of stable governance of the market?
I think we've already seen that happen, and we've seen that happen with like Live Score Group in Tombola, and then Betson kind of
course,
as we saw this week.
Recent, yeah.
They put their kind of M&A play in the Netherlands on the shelf. I think there's a lot of kind of sitting on the sides and developing, especially now. So I don't think there's going to be any M&A play or any kind of movement till you get a clearer picture of September and October. I think the key date here will be kind of the budget day of the Netherlands, which is, I think by the end of September, a government has to present a budget for a national budget for Prince's Day. And I think that if your leadership, it's you're running your Dutch enterprise on such kind of tight units that unless you can get kind of instant market momentum and your strategy to kind of really work to, on higher compliance costs, really no groundwork to set up a brand and advertising, so many restrictions, it's not an appealing market.
I think it's time for us to take a quick ad break, but then we'll be right back to carry on discussing this.
Join us for SBC Summit Malta from the 10th to the 12th of June. With over 75 exhibitors and more than 250 expert speakers, our expanded agenda covers all aspects of the European gaming industry. Get your tickets now at sbcevents.com.
Okay, thank you very much. We are back on iGaming Daily, where myself and Ted Memmier, or Big Ted, or OG Ted, as he's variously known, are talking about developments in the Netherlands. The government there has obviously collapsed. The four-party coalition has fallen apart because of the PPV party has quit, basically, because of a disagreement over immigration and asylum policies. And this has occurred in the midst of a quite extensive debate and review into the country's gambling legislation, which has only been governing the market for about 4 years now. So this is interesting, Ted, because I think there's a lot of international comparisons we can make here as well. Does this really showcase how vulnerable the gambling sector can be to political sensibilities and political sensitivities? Yeah.
And I really think that the Dutch market is kind of the acid test of this. And again, I'll go back to what I was saying. This market will get molded, and it will get molded either by a right-leaning coalition that will apply its populist measures, right? Or a left-leaning coalition that will go for kind of, I think, increased taxation and kind of stricter kind of one-to-one enforcement. And I think that this is going to be kind of a play out for a lot of markets in Europe and where kind of politics is at the moment. I don't think that you can apply any kind of remit of like, this is now a liberalized, a free market. I think every market comes with its restrictions, its political interplays, and that has to be kind of weighed up by the operator and leadership as to, do you launch in this market? Are the conditions favorable?
I mean, yeah, it's gambling in particular is an industry that is obviously can be very heavily influenced by various sort of different political, ideological opinions and sensitivities, isn't it? I mean, if you just like, I know I said earlier about how the UK often has more sort of stable governance than a lot of other European countries because of the less proportional voting system we have here, which leads to governments often having a much stronger mandate, more control of Parliament, and so on. But even then, we mentioned how during the course of the Gambling Act review, there was something like, was there 7 different ministers who were put in charge of it over that time? There was at least 7. I think I lost count, but there's so many ministers and then, under secretaries of state and so on who oversaw it. So that was hardly a stable process in of itself. And then, we've now got the situation here in Britain where a lot of local government are now calling for further reform, aren't they? And it seems to be a bit of a clash between local government and the central government over where this will go. There's different MPs are still calling for different changes. There's people calling for it to be more of a public health issue and so on. So, across so many markets, it's still it can be very politically tense in this regard. I mean, sort of building on this now, looking a bit into the future, where do you think our reporting of this market will lead? What do you expect us to be reporting about the Dutch market by the close of the year?
I think kind of the early playouts, I'm going to keep an eye on. So when the Dutch election is going to be called, also what kind of coalitions we're going to see forming. Again, it's a country that is so kind of divided. There is no party that's going to take an outright. So it's definitely a coalition coming in to govern the Netherlands. And I think from that, the next, whoever takes on that role of the legal protections minister, they really are going to have to stamp the imprint of what that coalition wants to see on the governance of gambling. Again, I think that the only positive here for the industry and for the operators in the government is that they might repeal kind of the second tax uplift coming in 2026. And that is very, very little.
Something else we've got to consider in between now and then is that obviously we talked earlier about how extensive the restrictions on advertising are in the Netherlands. They've got the ban on sponsorship coming in, haven't they? Which I think that is coming in regardless of what political direction the country is going in and whether or not it's got a stable government at the moment. That's coming in later in the summer. But they've talked the KSA and the, I guess now the former Minister of Legal Protections have talked about this, saying that they've been monitoring the situation in neighbouring Belgium quite closely, where there's been a ban on sponsorship, but operators and clubs have been kind of circumventing it with some different loopholes and finding ways to continue commercial partnerships, which obviously to the clubs is an incredibly valuable source of income. And they're going to be monitoring that quite closely and making sure that doesn't occur in the Netherlands. So I think that will be kind of the whole marketing angle is quite an interesting one to follow as well. And and just in general, like we've just said, the political sensitivities that impact the gambling industry, the various different ideological opinions there are on that. On the right side of things, you've got you might have some religious elements that see gambling as having a bit of a negative social impact. But then you've got the more free market, kind of libertarian side of right-wing politics, like we've discussed, who want to see just open business and open commerce. Then maybe on the left, you've got, again, people who see it as, who might see the industry as having some negative social connotations and wanting to restrict it further there. But then people who see it as being a kind of a valuable way for the state to boost tax revenue from the industry and fund various state projects through that. There's all sorts of different political angles at play constantly that are impacting this sector, isn't there? And I think the what's gone in the Netherlands this week has really illustrated that. I think we are now fresh out of time on this podcast, but Ted, thanks for taking the time to reenact Newsnight with me on this one. I know it's one of our favourite hobbies on this podcast. And with that conversation out of the way, we're going to hear from our SBC News senior journalist, Viktor, who, as we said earlier, is on the ground in the Netherlands at Gaming in Holland, and he's going to give us a bit of a breakdown of what the big talking points at the conference have been so far today.
This is Viktor Kayed, senior journalist for SBC News, live from Gaming in Holland. Kicking off the conference strong, GIH founder Willem van Oort said out loud what everybody in the room was thinking. The Dutch market is in trouble. With there being no indication that the 37.5% tax increase next year will be reversed, the sector is facing a significant challenge from regulatory burdens. The black market is also a concerning threat. Arjan Blok, CEO of the Netherlands Lottery, called for speed and action now as channelization rates are being placed under pressure. He added that half of every euro wagered by Dutch players is lost to the black market, and that this 50% loss in GGR, combined with the heightened tax, only spells bad news for the industry. Even the Dutch regulator Kanspelautoriteit noted that stricter regulations lead to less room for maneuver. Now that the Netherlands is heading towards new elections, stakeholders were urged to devise a fact-based, unified approach to inform the new government of the market's pressing needs and concerns. In summary, the main talking points at the event were the following: stronger industry cooperation against the black market, a collective call for the government to delay the 2026 tax increase, active efforts to turn regulations from a challenge into an opportunity, and building back trust between the sector and the government. Full coverage of the discussions will soon be available on the SBC News website.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.